All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Going to do another delusional episode today on Deleuze and Lautman. And of course, we got Chief Keefe back again to help educate us about Deleuze's thoughts on Lautman. And I don't remember going through this section in the book, and I didn't look up anything this time. So it'll be basically as if it's totally new information to me other than what I already know about Deleuze. But do you want to start off with an intro to Lautman and then go into Deleuze's thoughts about him as usual there, Tim?
Well, most of the time we fly blind anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So we are at the second to the last essay in the Deleuze book, and I'm excited. Now, with that being said, I made an executive decision. We skipped, actually, the preceding essay on Pierre Klossowski, who was a major influence on Deleuze, but Klossowski is difficult to get into. I've known about him for years, never really read too much. He's very well known for his one book, Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle, which was, again, a huge influence on Deleuze. So I decided to skip it and instead go to Albert Lautman, who was a philosopher of mathematics.
Okay. So what is Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle about?
It's a good question. I confess I haven't read it.
Okay.
I just kind of know about it. I think really what it has to deal with is the eternal return.
Yeah.
Or the eternal recurrence, depending on whatever way you want to define it.
Okay.
But I think Lautman's a little bit easier because it's philosophy of mathematics. Not that that's an easy subject to begin with, but it is easier to kind of get into.
Oh, okay.
All right. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and do a little bit of a survey on philosophy of mathematics, because I don't think we've covered this before. So let's go ahead to the Wikipedia page to the themes that one finds in philosophy of mathematics. And again, this is a high-level overview summary. So first what we have is mathematical realism, which holds that mathematical entities exist independently of the human mind. Thus, humans do not invent mathematics, but rather discover it, and any other intelligent beings in the universe would presumably do the same. In this point of view, there is really one sort of mathematics that can be discovered. Triangles, for example, are real entities, not the creation of the human mind. Okay, that much is self-explanatory. If you're a realist about mathematics, numbers, concepts about mathematics, geometrical shapes, they exist. They are not just in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then there is the anti-realism, which holds that mathematical statements have truth values, but they do not do so by corresponding to a special realm of immaterial or non-empirical entities. Major forms of mathematical anti-realism include formalism and fictionalism, which we'll get to down below.
So realism is more connected to the correspondence theory of truth in that sense?
Well, when you talk about realism and anti-realism, it could be any number of different things. If you are a realist about metaphysics, then whatever metaphysical concepts there are actually exist. Versus if you're only speaking about it as an anti-realist and you say, okay, well, we talk about metaphysical themes, but they're actually just concepts in our mind, or they emerge from the use of language or things like that, but they don't really exist.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then with contemporary schools of thought on mathematics, first there is mathematical Platonism, which is very much related to realism. The form of realism that suggests that mathematical entities are abstract, have no spatiotemporal or causal properties, and are eternal and unchanging. This is often claimed to be the view most people have of numbers. The term Platonism is used because such a view is seen to parallel Plato's theory of forms and the world of ideas, described in Plato's allegory of the cave. The everyday world can only imperfectly approximate an unchanging ultimate reality. Both Plato's cave and Platonism have meaningful, not just superficial connections, because Plato's ideas were preceded and probably influenced by the hugely popular Pythagoreans of ancient Greece, who believed that the world was quite literally generated by numbers. Okay, so there's that term Platonism again. It does not necessarily refer to Plato, I think we've seen this before. To call somebody a Platonist means that you believe in abstract entities. Okay.
Like Plato's forms.
Like Plato's forms, exactly. So numbers exist as an abstraction. Why do they exist as an abstraction? Because, stop and think about it when you're talking with something. You take two items and you have two other items and you add them together and you get 4 items. It doesn't matter what kind of things you're adding together. You just have 4 things. However, the number 2 and the number 4 and the number 1, if you count each one of these things distinctly, are abstract and they do exist in some other realm. That's being a Platonist. Okay?
Oh, I forgot I had myself muted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's Platonism. Okay, so then skipping through, because I'm trying to provide a groundwork for where Lautman is coming from. Okay, so then we get to logicism. Okay. It is the thesis that mathematics is reducible to logic, and hence nothing but a part of logic. Logicists hold that mathematics can be known a priori, meaning before experience, but suggest that our knowledge of mathematics is just part of our knowledge of logic in general, and is thus analytic, not requiring any special faculty of mathematical intuition. In this view, logic is the proper foundation of mathematics, and all mathematical statements are necessarily logical truths. And so, to the prime exponents of mathematical logicism, Rudolf Carnap, whose thesis is in 2 parts, such as the concepts of mathematics can be derived from logical concepts through explicit definitions. And then number 2, the theorems of mathematics can be derived from logical axioms through purely logical deduction. Okay. Frege was the founder of logicism. And then modern logicists, such as Bertrand Russell, returned to a program closer to Frege. Okay. So, just as a side note, in analytic philosophy, when you get into the history of it, it really starts with Frege, Gottlob Frege, who himself was a mathematician and a logician. Okay? But the basic premise of logicism is mathematics is reducible to logic. And oh, by the way, Alfred North Whitehead wrote with Bertrand Russell the Principia Mathematica, which was providing a logical foundation for mathematics.
Right, yeah, I remember that.
Okay. So moving on, then we get to formalism. So formalism holds that mathematical statements may be thought of as statements about the consequences of certain string manipulation rules. For example, in the game, code game, of Euclidean geometry, which is seen as consisting of some strings called axioms and some rules of inference to generate new strings from given ones, one can prove that the Pythagorean theorem holds. That is, one can generate the string corresponding to the Pythagorean theorem. According to formalism, mathematical truths are not about numbers and sets and triangles and the like. In fact, they are not about anything at all. Okay, so it's just a manipulation of certain strings.
So what exactly is meant by strings there? Is that in relation to string theory, or?
No. So we could draw on a parallel with a formalism about language. Okay, so if you're looking at a word, say apple, A-P-P-L-E, the word apple does not refer to anything, nor does it have any inherent value. It's just the way that the string of the letters is put together. Okay?
Okay. So like a string of equations similar to that.
Right. So in the case of mathematics, you're looking at, as the example said about Euclidean geometry, axioms are very important in Euclidean geometry. An axiom is what you take to be true as a starting point. Okay. But an axiom does not exist somewhere out there, as a Platonism would say. Nor is an axiom an abstract thing that might exist somewhere else. An axiom is just a relation of words and a relation of whatever the syntax is from which this axiom emerges. Okay.
Okay.
It's all about the form, a strict form.
Oh, okay. I see.
Okay.
So it's a little different from a linguistic construction in that way, then.
Right. It's very well related, very much related to it. Whenever you hear the term formalism, and it's not just in mathematics or it's in epistemology or whatever it is, you also find it in aesthetics. Okay. When you're focusing specifically about a form, actually a much better example within aesthetics is music. You're focusing specifically on the form. Is it a symphony? Is it a sonata? How is it the sonata? What is the form of the sonata? And blah, blah, blah. Very much in the classical period, Mozart, Haydn, and the like, really focusing on the form of the music versus what does the music express?
Okay.
Okay. That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
All right. Skipping down, then we have David Hilbert, who we've seen before, German mathematician, and who's going to be important for Lautman. Major early proponent of formalism was David Hilbert, whose program was intended to be a complete and consistent axiomatization of all mathematics. Hilbert aimed to show the consistency of mathematical systems from the assumption that the, quote, finitary arithmetic, which is a subsystem of the usual arithmetic of the positive integers, numbers, chosen to be philosophically uncontroversial, was consistent. Hilbert's goals of creating a system of mathematics that is both complete and consistent was seriously undermined by the second of Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which states that sufficiently expressive consistent axiom systems can never prove their own consistency. Or in other words, mathematics is not a complete and a closed system.
Okay.
So this undermines Hilbert's program to try to provide a complete formal system of mathematics, because Hilbert himself was a formalist, in which case, again, as we gave the definition of formalism, is just a manipulation of strings and how they are all coming together, rather than mathematics conveys something, or it's studying something that is concrete or something that is abstract.
Oh, okay. I see.
Okay?
Mhm.
So, all right. Then we go to intuitionism. So intuitionism is a program of methodological reform whose motto is that there are no non-experienced mathematical truths. From the springboard, intuitionists seek to reconstruct what they consider to be the corrigible portion of mathematics in accordance with Kantian concepts of being, becoming, intuition, and knowledge. Brouwer, the founder of the movement, held that mathematical objects arise from the a priori forms of the volitions that inform the perception of empirical objects. So in other words, mathematics emerges from sense perception. And oh, by the way, mathematics is also something very Kantian that exists within the mind a priori.
So
So
it's Kantian in that it exists a priori?
it exists a priori. So again,
Okay.
with the example, if you're taking two things and you're adding to them to two other things, and they make four things. Okay. So we're not approaching this from, there's an abstract concept that exists somewhere in another worldly realm. That would be the Platonist approach. Rather, we see two things, we see two other things, we move them together, and then we see four things. Okay, so there's a perception there. But then the operations of our mind, in the Kantian way, state, in the case of being, there are four beings, four things. Becoming, two then becomes four. The intuition forming this, and then knowledge, that now we have the knowledge that if you add two apples and two oranges, you might have two different fruits, but you still have four fruits. And all this is taking place within the mind. Make sense?
Okay. So taking place within the mind and sense perception, that sounds like it's sort of an empiricist approach to it.
It's not a 100% empiricist approach. Again, the key term here is Kantian. What did Kant say? Kant had asserted that, yes, we have sense perception, and this is how we derive a lot of our knowledge. But whatever we're taking in through our senses is a jumbled mass, or it's an unformed mass. And the concepts within our mind, Kant termed whatever we're taking into our mind as intuitions. Okay. And then the mind is what, with the with the prior conceptions of being, becoming, intuition, and knowledge, provides the form to what we take in through our senses. It's not purely by sense. It starts with sense, but then the mind is active in shaping what knowledge is.
Okay.
Okay.
So is this intuitionist approach then different also in that it's not claiming that mathematical concepts are something concrete and objective that exist in real space, or is that included within this Kantian or an intuitionist perspective?
Well, intuition is the operation of the mind. No, mathematics does not exist independent as an abstract.
Okay.
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 So that's where intuition comes in. What else is there? All right, so just briefly, let's look at constructivism. Okay, like intuitionism, constructivism involves the regulative principle that only mathematical entities which can be explicitly constructed in a certain sense should be admitted to mathematical discourse. In this view, mathematics is an exercise of the human intuition, not a game played with meaningless symbols, as what the formalist would say. Instead, it is about entities that we can create directly through mental activity. So constructivism is a type of intuitionism. Okay?
Okay.
All right. And that's it. So I did this to provide a framework so we can approach Lautman. Okay, any questions so far about these certain movements within the philosophy of mathematics?
I think I'm pretty clear so far. I might need to be reminded about a few of the details, but I think I'm pretty clear so far.
Sure. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead to the book. This is chapter 19, Albert Lautman by Simon Duffy. This starts on page 356. Duffy begins. He says, Albert Lautman was a philosopher of mathematics working in the decades between the two world wars in the first half of the 20th century. His dates are actually 1908 to 44. He postulated a conception of mathematics that is both formalist and structuralist in the Hilbertian sense. Okay, one that we forgot to cover was structuralism, which is a position holding that mathematical theories describe structures, and that mathematical objects are exhaustively defined by their places in such structures, consequently having no intrinsic properties. Okay, so you might have heard me mention before about structuralism, a movement from the 1960s.
Yeah.
Okay, so structuralism in that case was coming from Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist, about societies, myths are structures, and these are deeply embedded structures that exist. Same thing here with mathematics. So there exist structures, and mathematical concepts exist in structures. And these are axiomatic, taking as prior to and true, from which everything else derives.
Okay. So is that different from the Platonic forms?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because again, in the case of Platonism, you're talking about abstract entities.
Okay.
Whereas here, we're talking about structures, which, yes, you probably could argue is that a structure is an abstract entity, but a structure, what is a structure? A structure is made up of many different parts. And the structure provides the framework in which those other parts emerge.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's less abstract.
Less abstract than you're talking about again, you're not talking about individual abstractions. You're talking about composite abstractions with a structure. Right. Okay. So he postulated a conception of mathematics that is both formalist and structuralist in the Hilbertian sense. We touched a little bit on Hilbert. The reference to the axiomatic structuralism of Hilbert is foundational for Lautman. And it is because of this that his views on mathematical reality and on the philosophy of mathematics parted with the dominant tendencies of mathematical epistemology of his time. Lautman considered the role of philosophy and of the philosopher in relation to mathematics, to be quite specific. He writes that, quote, "In the development of mathematics, a reality is affirmed that mathematical philosophy has its function to recognize and to describe." He goes on to characterize this reality as an ideal reality that governs the development of mathematics. He maintains that what mathematics leaves for the philosopher to hope for is a truth which would appear in the harmony of its edifices. And in this field, as in all others, the search for the primitive concepts must yield a place to a synthetic study of the whole. Okay. So Lautman is a philosopher, but he approaches things from the philosophy of mathematics, which some philosophers in the past have done as part of their overall system, or they specifically lead with mathematics, because in their view, then you can ask contemporary mathematics the same thing, mathematics is sort of a quote-unquote perfect type of inquiry, because you're not worrying about sense perception necessarily. You're not worrying about anything social. You're not worrying about human beings or whatever it is. Mathematics is something that is, quote, pure, from which you can derive a, quote, absolute truth from it.
Sounds very rationalist.
Yes, I would agree. However, as we saw with the different movements in philosophy of mathematics, you have to be careful in defining it as rational. How do you mean is it rational? Is it rational that the mind can discover abstract entities in the Platonic sense? Or is it that the mind is constructing, as it would be in the intuition of the constructivist? Or is the mind really manipulating symbols in the case of a formalist, and to another extent a structuralist sense? Depends on how you define it.
Right, yeah. So depending on the way you define it, especially if it's an intuitionist model, for example, it could be much less rationalistic.
Right, because it deals with sense perception, what you're perceiving.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so going to the next page, 357. This is on Lautman's axiomatic structuralism. Duffy continues, "What is quite clear in Lautman's work is that he was not concerned with specific foundational questions in mathematics, neither with those relating to its origins, its relationship to logic, or to the problem of foundations. What he's interested in, rather, is shifting the ground of this very problematic by presenting an account of the nature of mathematical problematics in general." Okay. So then continuing, Lautman had a wider and more precise schooling in both the French and German mathematics of the 1920s to 30s than the majority of the mathematicians of his generation, who were often narrowly specialized. Lautman, along with Cavaillé, a French mathematician, was one of the introducers of the German axiomatic into a French context, dominated at the time by the intuitionisms of Poincaré, Borel, Baire, and Lebesgue. The two main ideas that are foregrounded in his primary theses in the philosophy of mathematics, and which dominate the development of his subsequent work, are the concept of mathematical structure and the idea of the essential unity underlying the apparent multiplicity of diverse mathematical disciplines. Okay, so Lautman here is a structuralist, first of all. And the essential unity underlying the apparent multiplicity of diverse mathematical disciplines. So, in mathematics, you have such things as arithmetic. Then you have geometry. Then you have trigonometry. Then you have calculus. Then you have linear algebra. Then you have Riemannian mathematics, and so on. So you have many different disciplines within mathematics. But Lautman is trying to get to what is it that unifies all of them.
Okay.
Okay. So he is a structuralist on the one hand, and he is a unificationist, you could say, on the other hand.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yes. Okay. So then Duffy continues, same page. Lautman considers the idea that there is an independence of mathematical objects compared to the theories in which they are defined to be steeped in the analysis and geometry of the 19th century. He, by contrast, championed the modern algebra and maintained that if classical mathematics was constructivist, remember what a constructivist is, modern algebra is, on the contrary, axiomatic. The introduction of the axiomatic method into mathematics means that there is an essential dependence between the properties of a mathematical object and the axiomatic field to which it belongs. The isolation of elementary mathematical facts that would function as building blocks is ruled out. So he's not a foundationalist. Lautman can therefore claim that the problem of mathematical reality arises neither at the level of facts nor at that of objects, but rather at that of theories. Okay. So let me just read that again. The problem of mathematical reality arises neither at the level of facts nor at that of objects, but rather at that of theories, which would kind of make sense because he is a bit of a structuralist. So the mathematical theory, say, we'll take a theorem, the Pythagorean theorem, okay, taking that as the whole rather than it being the sum of its parts, okay, taking the theorem, a theory, any kind of a mathematical theory itself, rather than it's just a collection of many different small things, like, but what's the Pythagorean theory? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Instead of focusing on A, B, and C individually, you take the whole theorem.
Okay.
That's what Lautman is going to say is important in mathematical reality.
So, I don't know. I'm a little confused about the distinction between the theory and the different parts that make up the theory.
Right. It's probably difficult to grasp at first face. So let me see if I can bring an analogy here. Well, again, it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That statement.
Okay.
So if you're looking at, we'll say a human being. We'll pick a generic example. When you talk about the human being, you're talking about a composite, really. You're not focusing so much on what is a human being: a head, a torso, 2 arms, 2 legs, sex organs and internal organs, and so on and so forth. Okay. That's not the human being if you're focusing on just a collection of parts. Rather, what is the human being that is the sum of its parts? Okay. That's what that statement means, is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Okay.
Because you're looking at the human taken as a whole.
Okay.
So applying this to the theory is the whole. Okay.
Okay.
So what Lautman is getting at is let's not preoccupy ourselves with looking at individual mathematical objects like numbers or shapes or things like that. Rather, let's look at the theories, because really the theory is what's going to explain mathematical reality versus, hey, you just got a collection of numbers or shapes here.
Okay. I see. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, stop and think about it. Whenever you've used math in the past, are you so concerned about individual numbers? Are you so concerned about individual shapes?
I guess, like, what's important when you're doing math problems is that you have the right formula for answering them. Because otherwise you can't figure out the answers, right?
Right. And what undergirds the practice of doing mathematics is a theory.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So then moving to the next page, 358. Okay, Duffy continues. He says, the first move that Lautman makes to develop his structural conception of mathematics is against the logical positivism of the Vienna Circle logicists. Lautman considered their effort to build mathematical concepts starting from a small number of concepts and from primitive logical propositions to be in vain, because it loses sight of what he refers to as the qualitative and integral character of the constituted theories. He argues that it is impossible to consider mathematical wholes as a result of the juxtaposition of elements defined independently of any overall consideration of the structure of the whole in which these elements are integrated. For Lautman, this impoverishment of logical positivism is the consequence of its conception of mathematics in propositional terms, as nothing more than a language indifferent to the content that it expresses. Okay.
This is interesting. I wouldn't have even thought that someone would argue for a mathematical theory against logical positivism, because I almost have I have this intuition as seeing them as inexorably connected in a way.
Yeah, you would think that, but what they're getting at here, and Lautman was not the first one to criticize the Vienna Circle. Wittgenstein also criticized the Vienna Circle too. And you see this with Wittgenstein was very active with the Vienna Circle early on in his career, and from that arose the Tractatus. What was he trying to do in the Tractatus? He was getting to what is the smallest, you could say, atomistic, indivisible elements of language, and how that language reflects, displays what is in the world.
Right.
Okay.
And then later on, his revised theory of language was almost kind of the opposite of that.
Right. Then he focused in the philosophical investigations as language making up of language games. Okay.
Right.
The rules that one has, but also a somewhat more holistic approach to language where you're getting away from this foundational approach to what language is. And there's not a one-to-one correspondence between language and reality.
Right.
Okay. So Lautman is kind of doing the same thing here, but from the perspective of mathematics.
Okay.
Now, the Vienna Circle, it made quite a splash back in the early part of when were they active, in the 1920s and the 30s or so, because you reduce everything to these small concepts and these primitive logical propositions, which primitive in this case is meaning at the very lowest level on which you could build more things. Okay. That's what they mean by a primitive logical proposition. But we're getting away from that. Okay. So then Duffy continues. Lautman also protests against the use made of Hilbert by the Vienna Circle logicists. Despite their claims to endorse the Hilbert program, Lautman is critical of the logicist interpretation of the term formalism, which he considers to be unrepresentative of Hilbert's thought. Okay. So Hilbert is usually classified as a formalist, but Lautman is saying that formalism is really not the best term to use here. While the logicists derive theorems in a formal system, such that the theorems are genetic or constitutive of the system, for Lautman, Hilbert is rather looking for theorems about formal systems, such as consistency or non-contradiction, completeness, decidability, etc. Rather than confounding mathematical philosophy with the study of the different logical formalisms, Lautman considered it necessary to try to characterize mathematical reality from the point of view of its own structure. Lautman considered this to be a more accurate characterization of Hilbert's meta-mathematical program, meta-mathematical, which he argued internalized the epistemological problem of foundations by transforming it into a purely mathematical problem.
Okay, so could you elaborate more on what meta-mathematical means?
Sure. So whenever you see the term meta, it's referring to what explains it. Okay. So take the term metaphysics. What is metaphysics? You have physics, which comes from physis, the Greek term for nature. Meta, referring to something that is above it. It is the explanation of physical nature. That's what metaphysics is. So meta-mathematical is the explanation of mathematical concepts.
Okay.
Then there is a whole field that I have a burgeoning interest in called metaphilosophy, which examines philosophy using its own tools. What is an argument? What is a fact? What is a theory? Kind of
What
in
is
philosophy. What is philosophy? Yes. How does one define philosophy?
Yeah.
Okay. So all this is metaphilosophical. In the mathematical program, what is mathematics? What is a number? What is a theorem? What is an axiom?
I think I just watched a meta-philosophical discussion yesterday. It was Daniel Kaufman, who I've become a big fan of, and I forget who the other guy was, but they were talking about what the purpose of philosophy is, like whether you should use it whether you should use philosophy as a practical life philosophy, or whether it's just as a tool for helping you investigate deep questions that might not necessarily actually have concrete answers.
Right. And, there have been many philosophers over history who have tried to answer the question of what philosophy is.
Mm-hmm. I kind of fall more into the second camp in terms of my opinion about it. Although I definitely have tried to do that before. Like I was, that I used to be a huge fan of Stoicism, and I still like it. But I did try to use that as a practical life philosophy for a long time, and it worked pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's had a resurgence.
Yeah.
Which I still think is funny, but that's just me.
Yeah. I know we talked about that.
Yeah,
I think we did an episode or two on Stoic metaphysics, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I still would like to cover, maybe as a possible series, what's his name? Becker's book, A New Stoicism, which is to update Stoic philosophy with, this has been over the past decades of advances in science and things like that. It's an upgrade, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
But he definitely approaches it from a strictly philosophical standpoint rather than the pop Stoicists, we'll say.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so
yeah,
this is
I want to get more into at some point, and not necessarily to do podcast episodes about it, but I want to get more into Massimo Pigliucci's work, probably more his philosophical work specifically, because I've watched a lot of videos and podcasts and discussions with him, but I haven't read any of his books.
Mm-hmm.
And his approach is interesting too.
Yeah, he's one of the contemporary popularizers of Stoicism.
Yeah, I know.
He's a trained philosopher and scientist, so it's there's some credibility to his work.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're still on page 359. Duffy continues. Against the logicist interpretation of Hilbert's work, Lautman argues that Hilbert substitutes for the method of genetic definitions, that of axiomatic definitions, and far from wanting to rebuild the whole of mathematics starting from logic, which is what a logicist would do, introduced, on the contrary, while passing from logic to arithmetic, and from arithmetic to analysis, new variables and new axioms, which each time broaden their domain of results. The Hilbertian axiomatic structural conception of mathematics that Lautman mobilizes in his work is a non-constructivist axiomatic. And he argues that mathematics thus arises as successive syntheses, where each stage is irreducible to the former. He continues by making the important point, again drawn from Hilbert, that a theory thus formalized is unable to bring with it the proof of its internal coherence. A meta-mathematics should be superimposed on it, which takes the formalized mathematics as its object and studies it from the double point of view of non-contradiction and completeness. Okay, so to unpack this a little bit. So Hilbert was not a logicist. What does a logicist do? Mathematics is derived from logic, the laws of logic. Hilbert was not really a formalist in the strict sense of the term, but he was a structuralist, and Lautman is a structuralist. However, as we saw with our survey of what the philosophy of mathematics is, that the problem that Hilbert ran into was with Gödel, the incompleteness theorem, the famous second one, which basically states that mathematics is not a closed system. If it were a closed system, then the axioms within it refer back to one another and provides a strong foundation. But that's not the case here. And Lautman is a structuralist, and he is trying to provide an axiomatic structural definition of mathematics. And how does he do this? Successive syntheses where each stage is irreducible to the former. So instead of constructing things, it is non-constructivist. You have this, something else, it synthesizes, then emerges, synthesize, almost Hegelian, but not quite. A synthesis of many different things.
Okay.
And then the theory thus formalized, able to bring with it the proof of its internal coherence. But the meta-mathematics provides the groundwork for this coherence because in the meta-mathematics, some we didn't cover before, this is where then it starts to define things from the terms of non-contradiction, like the law of non-contradiction, and the completeness of the theorem.
Okay.
Okay.
Could you remind me of exactly what the Hegelian synthesis means?
Oh, so you have a thesis, antithesis, and the synthesis.
Oh, okay, right.
Okay. So it's not quite Hegelian here. I just brought that in as an illustration.
Right. Okay.
Okay. All right. So according to Lautman, the value of a mathematical theory is determined by the meta-mathematical properties that its structure incarnates. The value of a mathematical theory is determined by the meta-mathematical properties that its structure incarnates. Okay? So then the next page, 360, Duffy continues. While Lautman took a position against the version of logicism and formalism proposed by the Vienna Circle, he also distanced himself from the empirico-psychologizing perspective of French mathematicians such as Léon Brunschvig. Brunschvig developed the idea that the objectivity of mathematics was the work of the intelligence in its effort to triumph over the resistance that the material on which it works opposes to it. Brunschvig goes so far as to maintain that any effort of a priori deduction tends to reverse the natural order of the mind in mathematical discovery. While Lautman follows Brunschvig in distrusting all attempts to deduce the unity of mathematics starting from a small number of initial principles, including the reduction of mathematics to logic, he doesn't endorse Brunschvig's concept of mathematical philosophy as pure psychology of creative invention. For Lautman, the task of characterizing the mathematical real must be undertaken rather by mediating between these two extreme positions. By extracting the minimal elements of each, the logical rigor of the former and the movement of the intelligence of the latter, Lautman proposes a third alternative characterization of the mathematical real that is both axiomatic, structural, and dynamic, where the fixity or temporal independence of the logical concepts and the dynamism of the temporal development of mathematical theories are combined. Okay, so to unpack this a bit, empirico-psychologizing. Now, in the early part of the 20th century, there was a movement called psychologism, which is that it's all in the head. But, an empirical psychologizing is empirical. Empiricism, you are taking things in by the senses, and then the mind is synthesizing these and coming up with new concepts. Okay, that's broadly speaking what an empirical psychologizing perspective is. And so this Brunschvig cat, this French guy, this is how mathematics emerges. Okay.
Okay.
So he was a psychologist. He was a psychologist, I guess the term is, and something of an intuitionist. Maybe not broadly speaking an intuitionist. But Lautman is trying to find that middle road between the operations of the mind as a pure psychology of a creative invention, meaning that it's all in the head and it's all it's a product of the mind, the imagination, you could say. And then on the other hand, the small number of initial principles, reducing mathematics to logic. So the middle point is that it is axiomatic structural. Again, he's a structuralist, remember, and dynamic. So the concepts are there, but they're changing. They are not fixed for all eternity.
Oh.
And mathematical theories, because you see this in the history of mathematics and the development, is that what was the case starting from centuries ago? Euclidean geometry. Then Riemann comes along, and we covered Riemann before in a previous essay. That kind of blew that out of the water, where it's that the shortest distance between 2 points is not necessarily a straight line. You can have curved space and things like this. So you're already seeing this development here. But some of those concepts that existed from Euclidean geometry never completely went away.
Oh, this is interesting. Like this notion of there being structures, but that they're not static and they're always changing. It reminds me of, I wonder if where Deleuze is going to go with this is to his plane of immanence.
Ah, well, We're, uncovering some of this, we're starting to see maybe some themes that are emerging here. Is that why did Deleuze take an interest in Lautman?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get to that shortly.
Cool.
Okay, going to the next page, 361. This is in the section, The Metaphysics of Logic, a Philosophy of Mathematical Genesis. Okay, so Duffy continues. For Lautman, the philosophy of mathematics is not reducible to a secondary epistemological commentary on problematic logical foundations, nor to historical or a fortiori psychosociological research, nor to reflections on marginal improvements such as intuitionism. It is, however, precisely in the research of the critical period relating to the non-contradiction of arithmetic that Lautman considers a new theory of the mathematical real to have been affirmed, one that is as different from the logicism of the formalist as from the constructivism of the intuitionist. Lautman claims that between the naive and critical periods, there is an internal evolution of logic, and he sets himself the task of disengaging from this new mathematical real a philosophy of mathematical genesis, whose range goes far beyond the field of logic. So genesis here in terms of creation,
Okay.
origins. Okay, so how does mathematics come to be? Okay, and he's not a logicist. What would the logicist say? Well, it's just derivative of logic, but he's not going to take that path.
Right.
All right, so continuing. While Hilbert's meta-mathematics proposes to examine mathematical theories from the point of view of the logical concepts of non-contradiction and completeness, Lautman notes that this is only an ideal towards which research is directed, and one knows at what point this ideal actually seems difficult to attain. This is an implicit reference to Gödel's second incompleteness theorem. We've already seen this, which demonstrates that any non-contradictory formal system cannot demonstrate its completeness by way of its own axioms. Lautman concludes from this that metamathematics can thus consider the idea of certain perfect structures, possibly realizable by effective mathematical theories, and this independently of the fact of knowing if there are theories enjoying the properties in question. What we have with the critical conception of the mathematical real is the statement of a logical problem without at all having the mathematical means of resolving it. What this means for Lautman is that the critical period marks the appearance of innovation in mathematics, not only at the level of results, but also as that of the problematic. Lautman proposes to characterize the problematic distinction between the position of a logical problem at this mathematical solution by means of an exposé, what he calls the metaphysics of logic. This takes the form of an introduction to a general theory of the connections which unite the structural considerations of the critical axiomatic structural conception with the affirmations of existence of a particular dynamic conception. Okay?
Okay.
So the metaphysics of logic. Coincidentally, there have been some books that have come out in the past few decades that are addressing such things as the metaphysics of logic.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so now we're on page 362. Duffy continues. He says, the linchpin of this distinction is that Lautman conceives this ideal reality as independent of the activity of the mind. He's talking about the mathematical real here. For Lautman, the activity of the mind of the mathematician only intervenes once it is a matter of creating effective mathematics, that is, effective mathematical theories. This ideal reality is constituted by what he refers to as abstract ideas, capital I. And whenever you see a capital I for ideas, we're kind of venturing over to Platonic ideas.
Right. Yeah.
Lautman proposes to call the relation between the independent activity of the mind of the mathematician and the ideas of this ideal reality dialectical, and he refers to these ideas as dialectical ideas. Lautman's principal thesis is that mathematics participates in a dialectic that governs it in an abstract way. He argues that the ideas which appear to govern the movement of certain mathematical theories, and which are conceivable as independent of mathematics, are not, however, susceptible of direct study. He goes on to claim that it is these dialectical ideas that confer on mathematics its eminent philosophical value. This is why Lautman considers mathematics, and especially modern mathematics, and here Lautman is referring to the post-critical developments in algebra, group theory, and topology, to tell, in addition to the constructions in which a mathematician is interested, another more hidden story that is made for the philosopher. Okay, so
what does topology mean in the context of math again?
so topology, yes, good question. So that is, I always forget what it is. The properties of a geometric object that are perceived under continuous deformations, such as stretching, twisting, crumpling, and bending, but not tearing or gluing.
Okay.
Okay. For example, a Mobius strip, which is if you take a strip of paper, twist it once, and then join the ends, that's a Mobius strip.
Okay. So it's
Okay.
like changing shapes?
Right. You're changing shapes by stretching them, bending, twisting, and so on.
Okay. But how come
Okay.
not tearing, or I forget what the other word was?
Tearing, or what did it say?
Is it because that would alter its structure? Is it the idea to change the shape by just manipulating it without actually changing the structure of it by tearing it or some other way?
Yes, if you tore it, then take the strip. If you tore it in two, then you've created two different things.
Okay.
And if you glued it, then you're joining two separate things.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a topological space is a set endowed with a structure called a topology, which allows defining continuous deformation of subspaces and more generally all kinds of continuity. Okay. Euclidean spaces and more generally metric spaces are examples of a topological space, as any distance or metric defines a topology. Okay, so the space, so if you take a triangle and the space in the triangle, that's a topology, how you define it.
Okay.
Okay, but let's get back to Lautman here. So what Lautman is getting at here is that there is an ideal reality he's speaking with, mathematically speaking, and it's independent of the mind. So he's not an intuitionist. He's not a constructivist. He is a structuralist. He's not a constructivist, but he's a structuralist. But these structures, he's saying, come about because of a dialectical process. Okay. And the mathematician's mind, as he says, only intervenes, creating effective mathematical theories. So if we're observing something within the physical world, okay, and we're approaching it from a mathematical perspective, the mind of the mathematician intervenes in this, comes up with a theory, and then the theories themselves cross-pollinate through a dialectical process.
Yeah.
Giving rise to new theories or changing the theories. Okay. So he asserts that there are structures out there, but the structures are not formalists. The structures are not just coming from the mind, intuitionist speaking from the mathematician. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. All right. So then this will be the province of the philosopher of mathematics. Okay. All right. So the next page, 363. This is Lautman's speculative logic. Duffy continues. He says, this account of ideas does commit Lautman to a version of Platonism. It is, however, a Platonism that is quite distinct from what is usually called Platonism in mathematics, which consists rather in the practice of summarily indicating with the name Platonism any mathematical philosophy for which the existence of a mathematical object is held as assured. In other words, we believe in abstract objects. Lautman considers this to be only one superficial understanding of Platonism. Nor does he understand by ideas the models of which mathematical objects would only be copies. This would be a strict Platonist approach. Lautman here is opposed to the Platonism traditionally founded on a certain realm of ideas, which interprets mathematical theories as copies, reproductions, translations, or simple transpositions of eternal ideal models or forms. Instead, he wants to remove the idea of an irreducible distance between the eidos, or the idea, and its representation to affirm the productive power of ideas which are incarnated in the theories. What Lautman wants to do is to restore to ideas what he considers to be the true Platonic meaning of the term. That is, the understanding of these abstract dialectical ideals as the structural schemata according to which effective theories are organized. So, he is something of a Platonist, but only in terms of a structure, not of theories being a copy of something that exists in the otherworldly realm.
Yeah, that's interesting that he's a Platonist in one way, but not the other. Like sort of that he's not a Platonist in the way he approaches trying to arrive at more Platonist positions in a way.
Right. Well, another way you could define Platonism is that he's a realist.
Yeah,
Okay. Whenever you hear the term realist, is that somebody is asserting something as real,
yeah,
versus a nominalist, which is just saying it's only in the mind, or it's a product of language, or it's all about language, or something like that. And a realist could be, you know, a strict Platonist, and says the term. In this case, Lautman is a realist about mathematical theories. Now, that's something we underscored earlier on, is that he is a realist slash Platonist about theories, but he's not about objects, mathematical abstract objects. The
right,
theories are what are real.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So then the next page, 364, Duffy continues. The nature of mathematical reality for Lautman is therefore such that mathematical theories give body to a dialectical ideal. This dialectic is constituted by couples of opposites, and the ideas or structural schemata of this dialectic are presented in each case as the problem of establishing connections between opposing concepts. Lautman makes a firm distinction between concepts and dialectical ideas. The ideas consider possible relations between dialectical concepts or conceptual couples, and these connections are only determined within the fields where the dialectic is incarnated. What Lautman is proposing is a speculative logic that considerably broadens the field and range of the metamathematics that he adopts from Hilbert. Okay, this is back to the metaphysics of logic here.
No, this is some of this is also kind of sounding a little bit like William James's anti-foundationalism.
Yes, yes, Lautman is an anti-foundationalist.
Okay, okay,
We saw this earlier in the short discussion about the logical positivists, the V and the circle.
right.
They
Okay,
were attempting to be foundationalists, but they didn't succeed at it.
okay,
Okay. So Duffy continues. So for Lautman, ideas constitute, along with mathematical facts, objects and theories, a fourth point of view of the mathematical real. Okay.
okay,
So Lautman thus reconsiders metamathematics in metaphysical terms and postulates the metaphysical regulation of mathematics. Now, again, to draw the distinction between him and Hilbert, Hilbert tried to provide a metamathematical grounding of mathematics, but he did so in a formalist sense. Lautman here is providing a metaphysical grounding.
okay,
Okay. However, Lautman is not suggesting that the application of metaphysics to mathematics, mathematical philosophy such as Lautman conceives it, does not consist in finding a logical problem of traditional metaphysics within a mathematical theory. Rather, it is from the mathematical constitution of problems that it is necessary to turn to the metaphysical, that is, to the dialectic, in order to give an account of the ideas which govern the mathematical theories. Lautman maintains that the philosophical meaning of mathematical thought appears in the incorporation of a metaphysics or dialectic, of which mathematics is the necessary consequence.
okay. Interesting. Yeah, that
Okay?
does. I definitely have, well, or I could have anticipated if not having heard before of math being interpreted in a metaphysical way.
Right. But not in a traditional metaphysical sense,
Right.
such
Right.
as, numbers exist. Okay. And so then mathematics is derivative from that, and it tries to, it's operating within the mathematical conception of what numbers are, but also, and then operating within the mathematical, shoot, lost my train of thought now.
Okay.
Okay.
Would you say that people who practice math professionally, like mathematicians and physicists, they sort of see math metaphysically in a way?
That's a good question. I would say no.
Okay.
I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask. You take any mathematician and say, well, can you explain to me what does mathematics do for you? Do you think that mathematics really represents something that's in another world? Yes or no? Do you think that mathematics is just a system of axioms and a system of rules, things like that? You probably if you asked a mathematician, they wouldn't have an answer for you, or would say, I don't concern myself with those questions.
Oh, okay, that's interesting because I kind of assumed that they would think that mathematical numbers actually exist objectively in the real universe and that the universe is made of numbers.
Maybe they do. Then they would call themselves Pythagorean.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I think you would get a better answer by a philosopher of mathematics. Most
Oh, for sure.
mathematicians, I don't really think they get much into philosophy. Just like physicists, physicists they don't.
Yeah.
Sure, there's got to be a time with every physicist that are thinking, what constitutes a particle or
Yeah.
something like that. But most of the time, they're just not preoccupied with that. They got other things that they're thinking about.
I watched a few videos lately about how a lot of popular physicists disparage philosophy and think that it's useless while also writing their own philosophy books, really, like that,
Yes, Neil
theorizing
deGrasse
about,
Tyson.
yeah, theorizing about science without having any scientific data behind it. And
Right.
that reminds me of Massimo Pigliucci too. I watched a debate from a long time ago with him and I think some of the, oh yeah, Lawrence Krauss and Daniel Dennett, and they were
Yeah,
debating about that too. And of
Lawrence
course,
Krauss is a big mouth.
yeah, he's so, like, now that I've learned a little bit about philosophy,
Hmm.
he's so good at showing his profound ignorance about philosophy.
Hey, he's a physicist, right? Physics
Yeah,
is more real than philosophy is. Who gives a shit about that?
yeah, it's not like you're doing mathematical equations about theoretical concepts.
Exactly. You just take it as a given. Yeah, it's math. Who argues he disputes math?
Yeah, it's better than philosophy.
It's better than
Philosophy.
philosophy, man. All right,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. Okay. All right. Page 365. Problematic ideas and the concept of Genesis. All right. So Duffy continues. The dialectical ideas are therefore characterized by Lautman as constituting a problematic. He argues that while the mathematical relations describe connections existing in fact between distinct mathematical objects, the ideas of dialectical relations are not affirmative of an existing connection between any concepts whatsoever. Okay. So what emerges from here, prior to what Duffy is going to say about Deleuze, is this concept of the idea, the capital I. Now we'd seen this in the previous essays where Deleuze talks about the ideas, but not in a Platonic sense. Okay, the ideas do not refer to something in the otherworldly realm. They are not the forms. That would be Platonism. Rather, the ideas are something that are, shall we say, existing above and beyond, although this is not in a transcendental sense. Now, we're going to
Okay.
be careful to use these terms transcendental, immanent, okay? Thinking, whenever you're talking about Deleuze, thinking in terms of an immanent or transcendental that is within the immanent.
Okay.
Gotcha?
Mhm.
So, again, in the previous essays, the ideas are something that exists somewhat transcendental that are informing everything that's happening on the plane of immanence, you could say.
And in the way that we've been going over with Lautman, they're always changing too. They're not static.
Right. So the structures, the axiomatic structures, are the ideas, but they are within the dialectic, changing, providing new syntheses. Okay, and this is where his metaphysical approach comes in.
Right.
To engender mathematical theories which are more fundamental to him. Okay, mathematical philosophy such as Lautman conceives it consists in apprehending the structure of a mathematical theory globally in order to extract the logical problem which is both defined and resolved by the very existence of this theory. There is thus an intimate link for Lautman between the transcendence of the ideas, let's be careful in that word, between the transcendence of the ideas and the immanence of the logical structure of the solution of a dialectical problem within mathematics. It is in direct relation to this link that Lautman characterizes the concept of genesis that he considers to be operative in the relation between the dialectic and mathematics. Okay, so let me go over this one more time. There is thus an intimate link for Lautman between the transcendence of the ideas and the immanence of the logical structure of the solution of a dialectical problem within mathematics. It is in direct relation to this link that Lautman characterizes the concept of genesis. So between the transcendence and the immanent comes genesis. Okay?
Okay.
So continuing on, page 366. The dialectic therefore functions by extracting logical problems from mathematical theories. The apprehension of the conceptual couple, that is, the logical schema of the problematic idea, only comes after having extracted the logical problem from the mathematical theory. This is the basis for Lautman's understanding of the genesis of concepts from the concrete that is operating in the dialectic. And it is the logical problem itself, rather than the problematic idea, that directly derives the development of mathematics.
Okay. You still there?
I think you're on mute.
Oh, your audio cut out for me for 10 seconds or so there.
Oh, so does this make sense so far?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, about Genesis?
Yeah.
Right.
Between the immanent and the transcendent, there is genesis.
Correct. But, as we just read here, the dialectic therefore functions by extracting logical problems from mathematical theories. And the logical problem itself, rather than the problematic idea which is transcendent, that directly derives the development of mathematics. So we're starting off from the theory, and the dialectical process is always working, extracting the logical problem from the mathematical theory. And that problem itself then drives new developments within mathematics.
Okay.
Okay. And the schema is the idea, the logical schema.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So then, next section, the virtual. The virtual and Lautman. The method that Lautman uses in his mathematical philosophy is descriptive analysis. The particular mathematical theories that he deploys throughout his work constitute for him a given, in which he endeavors to extract the ideal reality in which this material participates. That is, Lautman starts with mathematical theories that are already in circulation. Okay?
He's not inventing new ones.
No.
Okay.
Whatever comes afterwards in the development of logical theory, mathematical theory is, the new theories come from the logical problems from those theories that are already in circulation via a dialectical process.
Okay.
Okay? So then, bottom of the page, according to Lautman, the problematic structure of the problematic nature of the connections between conceptual couples can arise apart from any mathematics, but the effectuation of these connections is immediately mathematical theory. As a consequence, he maintains that mathematics thus plays with respect to the other domains of incarnation, physical reality, social reality, human reality, the role of model where the way that things come into existence is observed. This is an important point for Deleuze, one which shapes his strategy of engagement with a range of discourses throughout his work. Lautman's final word on mathematical logic is that it does not enjoy in this respect any special privilege. It is only one theory among others, and the problems which it raises, or which it solves, are found almost identically elsewhere. Lautman claims that for the mathematician, it is in the choice of original definitions and judicious axioms that true invention resides. It is by the introduction of new concepts, much more than by transformations of symbols or blind handling of algorithms, that mathematics has progressed and will progress.
Okay.
Okay? So, mathematics is not timeless. Mathematical theories are certainly not timeless.
Yeah, of course.
There is a dialectical process. There is, one could even say, some creativity that is involved in moving mathematics forward and how it progresses.
Okay.
And he is doing this by providing something of providing a metaphysical grounding of mathematics. So he is certainly not an intuitionist or a constructivist. He is certainly not a formalist. He is a structuralist. The axiomatic structuralists are wrapped up within the ideas that are providing the groundwork, the schema, the framework for the logical problems one extracts from that, and the dialectical process spurring on mathematical progress.
Okay.
Okay? So it certainly is dynamic here. At the same time, being structuralist. Because what the textbook definition of a structuralist was saying is these structures are timeless and they're unchanging.
Right. And he is saying that they're immanent, basically, right?
Yes, they are ideas, capital I, but they are not otherworldly. They are. He is described as a Platonist in a certain respect, but not a strict Platonist.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So now we get to Deleuze, page 368. Deleuze and the calculus of problems. It is in the chapter of difference and repetition, entitled Ideas and the Synthesis of Difference, that Deleuze mobilizes mathematics to develop a calculus of problems based on Lautman's work. So there's a quote here from Difference and Repetition, quote, following Lautman's general theses, a problem has three aspects: its difference in kind from solutions, its transcendence in relation to the solutions that it engenders on the basis of its own determinate conditions, and its immanence in the solutions which cover it, the problem being the better resolved the more it is determined. Thus, the ideal connections constitutive of the problematic dialectical idea, capital I, are incarnated in the real solutions which are constituted by mathematical theories and carried over into problems in the form of solutions. So basically a restatement of what we've already seen before.
Okay.
Okay, and then skipping down, Duffy says, Deleuze understands the differential calculus essentially as a calculus of problems, and the theory of dynamical systems as the qualitative and topological theory of problems, which can, when connected together, are determinative of the complex logic of differentiation. Deleuze develops the concept of a problematic idea from the differential calculus, and following Lautman, considers the concept of genesis in mathematics to play the role of a model with respect to all other domains of incarnation. While Lautman explicated the philosophical logic of the actualization of ideas within the framework of mathematics, Deleuze, along with Guattari, follows Lautman's suggestion and explicates the operations of this logic within the framework of a multiplicity, another key Deleuze term, of domains, including, for example, philosophy, science, and art in What is Philosophy, and the variety of domains which characterize the plateaus in A Thousand Plateaus.
Okay.
While for Lautman, a mathematical problem is resolved by the development of a new mathematical theory, for Deleuze, it is the construction of a concept that offers a solution to a philosophical problem, even if this newly constructed concept is characteristic of, or modeled on, the new mathematical theory. Okay?
Okay.
So the reference here to What is Philosophy is key, because in that book, Deleuze and Guattari talk a lot about concepts. Concepts are created, they're not discovered.
Right.
And then what Duffy is shining light on here, how Lautman inspired Deleuze was in his thinking about the creation of a concept as a solution to a philosophical problem. Okay? And even if the newly constructed concept is characteristic of or modeled on the new mathematical theory.
Okay.
Okay? So there could be a mathematical solution, of a sense, to a philosophical problem in the creation of a concept.
Okay.
Okay? So then, skipping down, Duffy continues. Deleuze defines the idea, capital I, as a structure. A structure or an idea is a system of multiple non-localizable connections between differential elements, which is incarnated in real relations and actual terms. For Deleuze, it is the problematic nature of the relations between conceptual couples that incarnate problematic ideas, which govern the kinds of solutions that can be offered to them. So instead of mathematics here, this is conceptual.
Okay.
What Deleuze specifically draws from Lautman is a relational logic that designates a process of production, or genesis, which has the value of introducing a general theory of relations that unites the structural considerations of the differential calculus to the concept of the generation of quantities. The process of the genesis of mathematical theories that are offered as solutions to mathematical problems corresponds to the Deleuzean account of the construction of concepts as solutions to philosophical problems. Okay, so basically Lautman really, when talking about the mathematical theories, really influenced what Deleuze was getting at with concepts.
Right.
Okay. So continuing, Deleuze actually extracts philosophical problematics from the history of philosophy, very much in the same way as what Lautman was saying about extracting logical problems from the mathematical theory. Deleuze actually extracts philosophical problematics from the history of philosophy and then redeploys them either in relation to one another, or in relation to mathematical problematics, or in relation to problematics extracted from other discourses, to create new concepts, which Deleuze and Guattari considered to be the task of philosophy. Okay.
Okay.
So, for example, one philosophical problematic could be the mind-body problem.
Right.
Okay. That's in the history of philosophy. Redeploying them either in relation to one another, say the mind-body problem in foundationalist epistemology. Okay. That's another problematic. Does, say, knowledge rest on a foundation? Okay, so you could take two of those, redeploy them together, and then possibly create a new concept. Don't know what it would be, but you could create something from there, and that is the task of philosophy according to Deleuze and Guattari.
The task of philosophy is to create idea babies through idea sex.
Idea sex, yes. Sounds very much like mixed mental arts.
Yeah.
But Deleuze and Guattari did this way back in 1991.
They were early mixed mental artists.
They were, yes. All right. So then the next page, 371. The speculative logic characteristic of a philosophy of difference. Here we go with difference again. So Duffy says, this speculative logic, the logic of the calculus of problems, is determined in relation to the discipline of mathematics and the mathematical problematics extracted from it. It is not simply a logic characteristic of the relation between the history of mathematics and its related mathematical problematics, or between axiomatics and problematics, or between what Deleuze and Guattari characterize as royal science and nomad science. It is rather a logic of the generation of each mathematical problematic itself, or of nomad science itself. Okay.
So could you explain a little more those two different types of science, royal science and nomadic science?
Sure. So let's see if I can remember this. Axiomatics are problem. Yeah, so there's a relation here between axiomatics. Okay, that would be the royal science. Axiomatics are taken as self-evident or true. Okay. Whereas a problematic is, it's contingent. It's not taken as true, at least all the time. And that's where nomad science comes in. Deleuze and Guattari like to talk about the nomadic approach to things, where you're not resting in one place for very long. You're jumping from here to there and seeing what's over here, staying for time, and then seeing over here time, and so on and so forth, instead of a royal science, whereas I know everything from these axiomatics.
Okay.
That's what I remember is the case. They refer to royal and nomadic science in What is Philosophy.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not surprised hearing that sort of preference for nomadic math by the sound of it being more preferred by Deleuze.
Well, not nomadic mathematics. Nomadic science.
Nomadic science. Yeah. Sorry,
right.
I got that wrong.
Nomadic science.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it would be fair to characterize mathematics as nomadic. Because mathematics is dealing with some things that are, broadly speaking, unchanging.
Yeah.
You could put a lot of brackets around that, saying that it's unchanging, because taking Lautman's tack is new theories are being created all the time from existing theories by this dialectical process that's existing.
Yeah.
Okay. So next page, 372. There is therefore a convergence between the logic of the local point of view of the differential calculus and the logic of the theory of relations as characteristic of Deleuze's philosophy of difference. The manner by means of which an idea is implicated in the mathematical theory which determines it, converges with, or serves as a function or mathematical model of, the manner by means of which a philosophical concept is implicated in the philosophical problematic which determines it. Okay. And then continuing, the problematic ideas that it is possible to recover within mathematical theories, and that are incarnated in the same movement of these theories, are characterized by the relations between the conceptual couples. These ideas, which are recast by Deleuze as philosophical concepts, are used to develop the logical schema of a theory of relations characteristic of a philosophy of difference. It is in the development of this project that Deleuze specifically draws upon Lautman's work to deploy a speculative logic that, in difference and repetition, is determined in relation to the history of the differential calculus as the logic of differentiation. In Expressionism and Philosophy, one of Deleuze's books, is determined in relation to Spinoza's theory of relations as the logic of expression, and in the Cinema books is determined in relation to the work of Bergson as a logic of multiplicities. Okay. Lautman outlined a critical program in mathematics that was intended to displace the previous foundational discussions that were occupied within the criticism of classical analysis. Against the logicist claim that the development of mathematics is dominated a priori by logic, Lautman proposes a metaphysics of logic and calls for the development of a philosophy of mathematical genesis. Deleuze responds to this call. His Lautmanian preoccupation with mathematics is primarily focused on locating what Lautman characterizes as logical ideas, which are recast by Deleuze as philosophical concepts to develop the logical schema of a theory of relations characteristic of a philosophy of difference. Lautman's work on the mathematics provides the blueprint for adequately determining the nature not only of Deleuze's engagement with the mathematics, but also of Deleuze's metaphysics of a speculative logic.
Okay.
The end.
Okay.
And we are at the end of the essay.
Okay. That's a shorter one.
It is. So again, the lesson to take from this is that Deleuze was very much influenced by Lautman's approach to being axiomatic, a structuralist with regard to mathematics,
Right.
but also dynamic because of the dialectical process, extracting the logical problems from mathematical theories, existing ones,
Right.
and then creating new theories, which then progresses with mathematics. But Deleuze took that and applied it to concepts in philosophy. So within the history of philosophy, there are problematics there, such as the example that I gave is you pluck out the mind-body problem and you pluck out foundationalism. Okay.
Okay.
Then, as you were saying, is you could definitely use the term for MMA, idea sex, then coming up with a different way, a new creation of a new concept to solve some kind of a philosophical problem that has now emerged in the contemporary world. In the past, it was not a problem. Now it is. So you can draw from two other concepts to create another concept to address this problem.
Right.
And that was the chief influence that Lautman had on Deleuze.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I like connecting that to some delusional concepts like difference and immanence and the virtual and multiplicity.
Right. Difference, virtual, multiplicity. Three key Deleuzian terms.
Right.
Okay. And that's all I got, unless you got any questions.
Okay. No, cool. I think I'm pretty clear on that. I think it helps having gone over, like having done so many delusional episodes so far, that I have a decent understanding of his concepts, so I can see how other philosophers' ideas influenced him more clearly.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful for sure.
Yes. Okay. So we're finished with Lautman, and we have one left, Gilbert Simondon.
Right. And then we'll still decide what series to start next in the new year.
That's right. But after Simondon, we are finished with Deleuze.
Yes.
For the time being.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching this delusional episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you found it as interesting as we did. And thanks so much to everyone who likes, shares this video, comments on it. Thanks to that person who just commented in the live chat and said, big fun of this project, wish I could stay, but I'll catch the rest of the recording later. It's good that people are interested in philosophy. Thanks especially to those of you who give me money on Patreon. I always appreciate that. And like I always say, love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. And also think about the importance of idea sex and immanence, and using idea sex to create idea babies and new concepts. And any last words there before we end it, Tim?
Sure. With the philosophy of mathematics, remember that sometimes it doesn't add up. But
yeah, for sure. All right. Adios until next time, everyone.